Chapter 16. Those who have journeyed through the south of France on foot may have noticed halfway between Bellegarde and Beaucaire a small inn, in front of which hangs a sheet of iron bearing a grotesque representation of the Pont du Gard. For the past 7 or 8 years, this inn had been kept by a man and his wife, whose only servants were a chambermaid and a stable boy. A staff which was more than sufficient now that the canal between Beaucaire and Aiguamortes had taken almost all the traffic off the road on which the inn was situated. The unfortunate innkeeper was none other than Dantes's old friend, Gaspard Caderousse. His pale, thin, sickly wife was almost constantly in the grip of a fever, which kept her in her bedroom on the second floor, while her husband went about his daily tasks. To her never-ending complaints against their fate, he usually answered only, "Be quiet, it's God's will." Okay, so Caderousse, the tailor, no, this is the tailor. He was one of the 3 who really ruined Dantes' life. Now he's a very poor innkeeper. Okay, so he used to be kind of a fancy tailor, and now he is a poor innkeeper, married to a sickly wife. One morning, as Caderousse was standing in the doorway of the inn, looking up and down the deserted road with a melancholy air, a horseman appeared in the distance, coming from the direction of Bellegarde. The rider was a priest, dressed in black and wearing a 3-cornered hat despite the fierce heat of the sun. He dismounted before the inn, wiping the perspiration from his forehead with a red cotton handkerchief. Caderousse eagerly came out to meet him. The priest stared at him with peculiar attention for 2 or 3 seconds, then said, in a pronounced Italian accent, "You're Monsieur Caderousse, aren't you?" "Yes, sir," said the innkeeper, surprised. "I'm Gaspard Caderousse at your service." "Weren't you once a tailor?" "Yes, but that turned out badly. The weather is so hot in Marseille that I wouldn't be surprised if people finally stopped wearing any clothes at all. Speaking of heat, wouldn't you want something to drink?" "Yes, bring me a bottle of your best wine and we'll go on with our conversation." When Caderousse returned a few minutes later, he found the priest sitting on a stool with his elbows on a table. "Are you alone?" asked the priest, as his host set a glass and a bottle of wine in front of him. "Practically alone. My poor wife is always sick, so she can't be of much help to me." "Oh, you're married," said the priest with a certain interest. He cast around him a glance which seemed to estimate the true value of the dilapidated furnishings of the inn. "You can see I'm not rich," said Caderousse, sighing. "But what can you expect? Being an honest man isn't enough to bring prosperity in this world." The priest looked at him piercingly. "Yes, an honest man," repeated Caderousse, returning the priest's steadfast gaze. "That's one thing I can boast of, and not everyone nowadays can say the same thing." "You're fortunate if your boast is true," said the priest, "because I am firmly convinced that sooner or later the good are rewarded and the wicked are punished." "Your profession requires you to say that," said Caderousse bitterly, "but everyone is free not to believe what you say." "You're wrong to speak that way," said the priest, "for I myself may soon give you proof of what I say." "What do you mean?" asked Caderousse with surprise. "First of all, I must make sure you're really the man I'm looking for. In 1814 or 1815, did you know a sailor named Dantes?" "Dantes? Yes, I know him. Poor Edmund. In fact, he was one of my best friends. Do you know him? Is he still alive? Is he free? Is he happy?" "He died in prison, wretched and hopeless." Caderousse turned pale. He turned away, and the priest saw him wipe a tear from his eye with a corner of the red handkerchief which he wore around his head. "Poor boy," he murmured. "There's another proof of what I was telling you, that God is good only to the wicked. Ah, the world is going from bad to worse." "You seem to have been quite fond of him," said the priest. "Yes, I was very fond of him," said Caderousse, "although I must admit I envied his happiness for a short while. But since then, I can assure you I've felt great pity for misfortune. There was a silence during which the priest searchingly scrutinized the innkeeper's face. Did you know him? Went on Kadaru. I was called to his deathbed to give him the last consolation of religion. And there, on his deathbed, he swore to me by Jesus Christ that he did not know the cause of his imprisonment. That's true, he couldn't know it, said Kadaru. No, he wasn't lying, poor boy. He therefore begged me to bring to light the cause of the misfortune which he himself never understood, continued the priest, and to clear away the stain from his memory. A rich Englishman who was in prison with him, but who was released at the Second Restoration, owned a diamond of great value. When he left prison, he gave it to Dantes, who had once taken care of him like a brother during a long illness he had suffered. Instead of using it to bribe his jailers, who might well have taken it and then betrayed him, Dantes always kept the diamond in case he should get out of prison, for it would have assured his fortune. It must have been a diamond of great value, as you say, said Kadaru, his eyes shining. Everything is relative, said the priest. It was of great value for Dantes. It had been appraised at 50,000 francs. 50,000 francs? Exclaimed Kadaru. I have it in my possession now. Dantes made me the executor of his will. I had 3 good friends and a fiancée, he told me, and I'm sure all 4 of them still miss me. One of my good friends was named Kadaru. Kadaru shuddered. Another was named Danglars, continued the priest, without appearing to notice Kadaru's emotion. And the third was my rival, but he also loved me. His name was Fernand. As for my fiancée, her name is Mercedes. Go to Marseille, sell this diamond, divide the money into 5 parts, and give it to the only people on earth who love me. Why did he say 5 parts? Asked Kadaru. You've mentioned only 4 persons. The 5th one is dead. He was Dantes' father. I was told about it in Marseille, went on the priest, making an effort to appear indifferent. But he died so long ago that I was unable to learn any of the details. Would you happen to know anything about it? No one knows better than I do, replied Kadaru. I lived next door to him. Oh yes, he died less than a year after his son disappeared. Poor old man. How did he die? I think the doctors called his illness gastric enteritis. Those who knew him said he died of sorrow, but I almost saw him die, and I say he died of... Kadaru stopped short. Died of what? asked the priest anxiously. Of hunger. Of hunger? Cried the priest, leaping from his stool. Why, even the lowest animals don't die of hunger. A dog wandering through the streets will always find someone to throw him a crust of bread. And you tell me a man died of hunger in the midst of other men who call themselves Christians? Impossible. Oh, it's impossible. I've told you the truth, said Kadaru. And you're wrong to tell it, said a voice from the staircase. The 2 men turned around and saw the sickly face of Kadaru's wife, who had dragged herself to the head of the stairs to listen to their conversation. She was sitting on the top step with her head on her knees. It's no business of yours, said Kadaru. This gentleman asked me for some information. It wouldn't be polite to refuse. No, but it's not prudent to tell him either. How do you know why he wants to make you talk, idiot? Your husband has nothing to fear, madam, said the priest, as long as he speaks frankly. I can assure you that no harm will come to you because of me. Kadaru's wife mumbled a few unintelligible words, let her head drop back to her knees, and continued to tremble with fever, leaving her husband free to resume his conversation, but placed in such a way that not a word of it would escape her. But the poor old man must have been forsaken by everyone if he died such a death, said the priest. No, Mercedes and Monsieur Morel didn't forsake him, said Kadaru. But the old man took a profound dislike for Fernand. The same Fernand, added Kadaru with an ironic smile, that Dantes named as one of his friends. Wasn't he really his friend? Asked the priest. Gaspard, said the voice from the top of the stairs. Be careful of what you say. Kadaru's only reply to the interruption was a gesture of impatience. Is it possible to be the friend of a man whose wife you covet? He said. Dantes had a heart of gold. He called those people his friends, poor Edmund. I suppose it's better he never found out. It would have been too hard for him to forgive them as he was dying. And no matter what they say, I'm more afraid of the curse of a dead man than the hatred of a living one. Do you know how Fernand wronged Dantes? I certainly do. Then tell me about it. Gaspard, you can do as you like, said Madame Caderousse, but if you listen to me, you won't say anything. This time, I think you're right, said Caderousse. You don't want to tell me anything about it? Asked the priest. What good would it do? If Edmund were alive and came to me to find out once and for all which people were his real friends and which were his enemies, I'd tell him. But he's dead and buried according to what you've told me, so you can no longer hate anyone or take revenge on anyone. Let's leave all that in the past. Do you want me to give these people, who you may consider false friends, a gift intended to reward them for their faithfulness? No, you're right, said Caderousse. Besides, what would poor Edmund's gift mean to those people? A drop of water falling into the ocean. Yes, but don't forget that those people could crush you with their little finger if they wanted to, said his wife. Do you mean to say that they've become rich and powerful? Asked the priest. Don't you know their story? No, tell it to me. Caderousse reflected for a moment. No, he said, it would take too long. You're free to remain silent if you wish, my friend, said the priest in a tone of utter indifference, and I respect your scruples. We'll say no more about it, and I'll sell the diamond. He took the diamond from his pocket and let it glitter before Caderousse's dazzled eyes. Come look at this, Caderousse called out hoarsely to his wife. A diamond, said Madame Caderousse, standing up and walking down the stairs. Where did it come from? Didn't you hear? It's a diamond that Dantes left to his father, his fiancée, and his 3 friends, Fernand, Danglars, and me. A man who betrays you is not your friend, muttered Madame Caderousse. Yes, that's what I was saying, said Caderousse. It would be almost a profanation, a sacrilege, to give a reward to treason, perhaps even crime. Okay, so the priest who's kind of interviewing Caderousse is trying to get him to tell him, no, like, why are Fernand and Danglars were not good friends to Dantes, and the wife of Caderousse keeps saying, like, don't like you talk. Fernand and Danglars, they're so powerful already. You don't want to get in trouble with them, okay? And even Caderousse was like, yeah, I won't talk about it. I won't talk about what they did to Dantes. But when the priest shows the diamond, no, the diamond that's supposed to be split between all of them, the friends of Dantes, right away, Madame Caderousse and Caderousse want to tell the priest what Danglars and Fernand did, no? So that they would get the diamond completely, instead of it being divided between sorry. That's a chair. I'm putting my feet up because I want to get comfy. Alright. So they all of a sudden want to reveal what Fernand and Danglars did so that they would have the full diamond, no? And it's weird, guys, no, because Caderousse was actually in on the plot to kind of betray Dantes, but now he's acting as if it was just Fernand and Danglars. And that's not surprising, no, because Caderousse, ever since the early chapters, he's sneaky good. He's a snake. He's very two-faced. He's very fake. That's kind of his thing, no? He's very, very fake good. And so, right away, once he sees it will give him gain, he wants to betray Danglars and Fernand, even though they're powerful and dangerous men. It will be your own fault, said the priest calmly, putting the diamond back into the pocket of his cassock. Now tell me where I can find Dantes' friends so that I can carry out his last wish. Large beads of perspiration broke out on Caderousse's forehead. He saw the priest stand up, walk over to the door as if to look at his horse, and then turn back. Caderousse and his wife looked at each other with an indescribable expression. The whole diamond would be for us, said Caderousse. Do you really think so? A priest wouldn't lie to us. Do whatever you think best, said his wife. I leave it to you. She climbed slowly up the stairs. At the last step, she turned around for a moment and said, Think it over carefully, Gaspard. I've already made up my mind, said Kaderu. What have you decided? Asked the priest. To tell you everything. I think that's the best thing to do. Not that I'm anxious to hear about things you'd prefer not to tell me, but it will be better if I can distribute Dantes' legacy according to his true wishes. I hope so, said Kaderu, his cheeks flushed with hope and cupidity. I'm listening. First of all, began Kaderu, I must ask you to promise me something. What? I want you to promise me that if you make use of the information I'm about to give you, you will never tell anyone you heard it from me, because the people I'm going to talk about are rich and powerful, and they could destroy me as easily as breaking a glass. Don't worry, my friend. I'm a priest, and I never reveal confessions made to me. Remember that our only purpose is to carry out the last wishes of our friend. So speak frankly and without hatred. I'll probably never know the persons you're going to mention. Besides, I'm Italian, not French, and I'll soon be going back to my monastery, which I left only to comply with the request of a dying man. Kaderu seemed reassured. In that case, he said, I'll tell you the real truth about the men who Edmund thought were such sincere and devoted friends. It's a sad story. You probably know the beginning, don't you? Yes. Edmund told me everything that happened up to the time he was arrested at his own betrothal feast. Well, after Edmund was arrested, Monsieur Morel left to get some information on his arrest. The news he brought back was very sad. Edmund's father went home alone and spent the whole day in his room. He didn't sleep at all that night. I lived on the floor underneath, and I could hear him pacing up and down all night long. I didn't sleep either, for that matter. I was terribly upset by the old man's grief, and each step he took hurt my heart as much as if he were actually stepping on my chest. Whatever, Kaderu, you're so fake. The next day, Mercedes came to Marseille to ask for Monsieur de Villefort's help, but she accomplished nothing. Then she visited the old man. When she saw how grief-stricken he was and found out that he hadn't slept or eaten since the day before, she wanted to take him with her and take care of him. But he refused. No, he said, I won't leave this house. My poor son loves me more than anything else in the world, and if he gets out of prison, this is the first place he'll come. What would he say if I weren't here to meet him? He began to isolate himself more and more every day. Monsieur Morel and Mercedes often came to see him, but his door was locked, and although I was sure he was at home, he wouldn't answer. On one of the rare days when he received Mercedes, he said to her, Believe me, my daughter, he's dead. And instead of our waiting for him, he's waiting for us. I'm lucky because I'm the oldest. I'll be the first one to see him again. However good you may be, you soon stop seeing people who make you sad. After a while, the old man was completely alone. The only people I saw coming to see him were strangers who would leave his room carrying some sort of package. I realized later what was in those packages. He was selling the little he owned in order to live. Finally, he'd sold everything he had. He owed 3 months' rent. The landlord threatened to put him out, then agreed to give him 1 more week. I found out about this because the landlord stopped by to see me on his way down. For the first 3 days, I heard him pacing up and down as usual, but on the 4th day, I heard nothing. I went up to see him. His door was locked, but I looked in through the keyhole. He looked so pale and haggard that I thought he must be seriously ill. I sent word to Monsieur Morel and Mercedes. They both came immediately. Monsieur Morel brought a doctor who gave a diagnosis of gastric enteritis and prescribed a fast. I was there, and I'll never forget the old man's smile when he heard that prescription. From then on, he left his door unlocked. He had an excuse for not eating. The doctor had ordered him to fast. The next time Mercedes saw him, he looked so bad that she wanted to take him into her home and take care of him, as she had asked to do at first. Monsieur Morel agreed with her, but the old man refused again. Monsieur Morel left a purse with money in it on the mantelpiece, but the old man still wouldn't eat anything. Finally, after 9 days of despair and fasting, he passed away. As he died, he cursed those who were responsible for his misfortunes and said to Mercedes, "If you see my Edmund, tell him I died blessing him." The priest stood up and paced the floor for a few moments. After a time, he said hoarsely, "What a terrible misfortune, and all the more terrible because it didn't come from God, but from men alone." "Now tell me about these men," said the priest. "But remember," he added almost threateningly, "you agreed to tell me everything. Who were those men who made the son die of despair and the father of hunger?" "They were the two men who were jealous of him, one because of love and the other because of ambition, Fernand and Danglars." "How did their jealousy manifest itself?" "They denounced him as a Bonapartist agent." "But which of the two denounced him? Which one is really guilty?" "Both of them. One wrote the letter and the other mailed it." Okay, so Fernand and Danglars were the ones who accused Dantes of being a traitor, which led him to Villefort, and Villefort, again, to cover up the crimes of his father, sent him to the Chateau d'If, no? And one of them wrote the letter and another one mailed the letter. "Where was the letter written?" "In the tavern the day before the betrothal feast." "But you were there," cried the priest suddenly. "Who told you I was there?" asked Caderousse, astonished. The priest realized he had anticipated the story. "No one," he said, "but you know the details so well that you must have been a witness." "It's true," said Caderousse in a choked voice. "I was there." "And yet you didn't oppose their infamous deed," said the priest. "That makes you their accomplice." "They'd given me so much to drink that I hardly knew what I was doing. I protested as much as I was able to in that state, but they told me the whole thing was only a joke." "You're right." "But the next day you could see it wasn't a joke. You were there when he was arrested." "Yes, and I wanted to tell what I knew, but Danglars persuaded me not to. If he should happen to be really guilty, he told me, anyone who upholds him will be taken for his accomplice. I was afraid of politics the way it was carried on in those days, so I kept quiet. It was cowardly of me, I admit it, but it wasn't a crime." "I see. You only let things take their course." "Yes," replied Caderousse, "and I still regret it night and day. I've often asked God to forgive me for it. It's the only thing I ever did in my whole life that I could seriously reproach myself for, and I'm sure it's the cause of all my bad luck. I'm still expiating a moment of selfishness. Whenever my wife complains, I always tell her, 'Be quiet, it's God's will.'" He bowed his head with every appearance of sincere repentance. "You've spoken very frankly," said the priest. "A man who can accuse himself like that deserves to be forgiven." "Unfortunately," said Caderousse, "Edmund is dead and he never forgave me." "He didn't know." "Well, perhaps he knows now," said Caderousse. "They say the dead know everything." There was a silence. The priest stood up and walked thoughtfully back and forth for a time. Then he came back and sat down again. "You mentioned a certain Monsieur Morel several times," he said. "Who was he?" "He was the owner of the Pharaon." "What part did he play in this sad story?" "The part of an honest, courageous, and loyal man. He interceded for Dantes at least 20 times. When the emperor returned, he wrote, begged, and threatened so strongly that after the Second Restoration he was persecuted as a Bonapartist. He often came to see Dantes' father, as I've already told you, and offered to take him into his home. The day before the old man died, as I've also told you, he left a purse on the mantelpiece. The money it contained paid for his funeral and paid off his debts, so that the poor old man at least died as he lived, without doing wrong to anyone. I still have the purse. Is Monsieur Morel still alive?" "Yes." "Then he must be a man blessed by God. He must be rich and happy." Caderousse smiled bitterly and said, "Yes, he's happy as I am." "Monsieur Morel is unhappy?" "He's on the brink of poverty and, worse still, of dishonor. After 25 years of hard work, after having acquired the most honorable place in the business world of Marseille, Monsieur Morel is completely ruined. He's lost 5 ships in 2 years, and 3 other firms have gone bankrupt on him. His only hope now is the same Pharaon that poor Dantes sailed on. She's on her way from India with a cargo of cochineal and indigo. If she goes down like the others, he's lost." So Monsieur Morel, though the boss of the ex-boss of Dantes, was actually very kind and very loyal to Dantes, he's almost bankrupt already. He lost so many ships, he's very, very poor now. Or he's gonna get very, very poor. "Does the unfortunate man have a wife and children?" "Yes, he has a wife who's borne up under everything like a saint. He has a daughter who was about to marry a man she loves, but now his family won't let him marry the daughter of a ruined man. Finally, he has a son who's a lieutenant in the army, but that only doubles the poor man's sorrow. If he were alone, he'd blow his brains out, and that would be the end of it." "It's terrible," exclaimed the priest. "And what became of Danglars? He was the guiltiest, wasn't he? The instigator?" "He left Marseille and went to work for a Spanish banker. During the war with Spain, he contracted to furnish some of the French army supplies and made a fortune. He speculated with his money and quadrupled it. After the death of his first wife, who was the daughter of the banker he worked for, he married a woman, Madame de Nargone, whose father is a chamberlain and in high favor at court. He'd already made himself a millionaire. He was now made a baron. Today he's Baron Danglars. He has a mansion in the Rue de Mont Blanc, 10 horses in his stable, 6 lackeys in his antechamber, and I don't know how many millions in his coffers." So Monsieur Morel is almost bankrupt, but Danglars is a baron and a millionaire. "And what about Fernand?" asked the priest. "How could a poor Catalan fisherman without education or resources make a fortune? I confess I don't understand it." "No one else understands it either. There must be some strange secret in his life that no one knows about. Fernand is also very rich, but they don't know why." "But by what visible steps did he reach his wealth and position?" "Well, Fernand was drafted into the army a few days before the Second Restoration. He was put into a regiment that was about to leave for the frontier. He took part in the Battle of Ligny. The night of the battle, he was on sentry duty outside the door of a general who was in secret contact with the enemy. That same night, the general went over to the English. He proposed to Fernand that he go with him. Fernand deserted his post and followed him. This would have meant a court-martial for Fernand if Napoleon had stayed in power, but it was a recommendation to the Bourbons when they took over the throne. He was made a lieutenant when he came back to France, and he was a captain by the time the war with Spain began, which was when Danglars was making his first speculations. Since Fernand was a Spaniard, he was sent to Madrid to sound out the feelings of his compatriots. There he met Danglars, became very friendly with him, promised his general support from the royalists in the capital and in the provinces, guided his regiment along routes known to him alone, and guarded by royalists and in general, rendered such services during that short campaign that he was finally promoted to colonel, received the cross of an officer of the Legion of Honor, and was made a count. Fate, murmured the priest. Yes, but that's not all. When the war with Spain was over, Fernand's career was threatened by the long peace which seemed likely to reign over Europe. Greece had risen up against Turkey and had just begun her war of independence. All eyes turned toward Athens. It was fashionable to pity and uphold the Greeks. Fernand asked for and obtained permission to serve in Greece without losing his rank in the French army. Some time later it was learned that the Count of Morcerf, and this was the name he now bore, had entered the service of Ali Pasha with the rank of Instructor General. Ali Pasha was killed, as you know, but before he died, he rewarded Fernand by leaving him a large sum of money. Fernand returned to France and was promoted to Lieutenant General. Today he lives in a magnificent mansion in Paris at 27 Rue du Helder. Okay, so Danglars was able to make a fortune, or he was able to make he was able to become a millionaire. Si Danglars, by being smart with his money. Alright, but see Fernand, the reason why he was able to become powerful was because Fernand, good guys, he's shady good. He betrayed people, he abandoned the army, he made alliances with powerful people, and it's like whenever someone was going to win, Fernand would switch sides. Whenever it appeared as if his side was losing, he would switch to the winning side. He would be a turncoat, he would be a traitor to his side, and so when the other side wins, he benefits from it until he is actually he has a lot of power and he has a lot of money and influence already because he's kind of a double agent. He acts very shady, He really turns on the team he's in, betrays them so that he can kind of celebrate with the victors, celebrate with the ones who actually did win, and gain from the victory. So he's not loyal good. The priest opened his mouth to speak, hesitated an instant, then said with an effort, "And what about Mercedes? I was told she disappeared." Disappeared? Yes, she disappeared, but as the sun disappears at night to rise brighter than ever the next day. "Did she make her fortune too?" asked the priest with an ironic smile. "Mercedes is now one of the greatest ladies of Paris," said Caderousse. "At first she was completely overcome with grief at losing Edmond. I've already told you how she begged Monsieur de Villefort for help, and how devoted she was to Edmond's father. In the midst of her despair, she was struck by another misfortune. Fernand left to go into the army. She knew nothing of what he had done to Edmond, and she loved him like a brother. When he left, she was all alone. 3 months went by without word from either Edmond or Fernand. All she had before her eyes was an old man, slowly dying of despair. One night, Fernand walked in wearing his lieutenant's uniform. His absence hadn't been the main cause of her grief, but at least he was a part of her past life, which had now returned to her. She received him with a joy which he mistook for love, but which was actually only happiness at no longer being alone in the world. Then Edmond's father died, as I've told you. If he'd lived, Mercedes might never have married another man, for he'd have been there to reproach her with her unfaithfulness. Fernand knew that. When he learned of the old man's death, he came back. The first time he hadn't said a word about love to Mercedes. This time he reminded her that he loved her. She asked him for 6 more months to mourn and wait for Edmond. Well, that made 18 months in all, said the priest with a bitter smile. What more could any lover ask? Then he murmured the words of the English poet, "Frailty, thy name is woman." It's very clear, guys. The priest is very invested in the story. He's listening to the story and he's like, Mercedes married after 18 months. So that is a year and a half. She waited for him a year and a half and then she married someone else. And the priest is like, girls are so weak good. Girls are not faithful. It didn't take her very long before she married someone else. Fernand Pagud, she married Fernand. And I know she didn't know that he was the traitor, but he was really the rival of Dantes, but she loved him like a brother, and she was so depressed after Edmond and after the father of Edmond died, and so she married him. And it's clear, guys, the priest, he's clearly not a priest. He's clearly someone who's very invested in the story, 6 months later, went on Caderousse, the wedding took place in the Église d'Acules, the same church in which she was to have married Edmond, muttered the priest. The only difference was in the bridegroom. Although Mercedes seemed calm after her marriage, continued Kadaru, it's still true that she fainted once when she passed by the tavern where she'd celebrated her betrothal feast 18 months before with a man she'd have realized she still loved if she dared look into the depths of her heart. I saw Fernand at that time. He was happier, but he was still worried because he was afraid Edmund might reappear at any moment. Almost immediately after their marriage, he and his wife moved away. The Catalan village held too many dangers and too many memories. Did you ever see Mercedes again? Asked the priest. Yes, at the time of the war with Spain, I saw her at Perpignan, where Fernand had left her. She was then educating her son. The priest started. Her son? He exclaimed. Yes, her son, Albert. But how could she educate her son? Asked the priest. It seems to me Edmund said she was a simple fisherman's daughter, beautiful but uneducated. Oh, said Kadaru, did he know his own fiancée so little? If crowns were only for the most beautiful and intelligent heads, Mercedes would be a queen now. As her fortune grew, she grew with it. She learned drawing, she learned music, she learned everything. Between you and me, though, I think she learned all that only to distract herself. I think she put all those things in her head in order to forget what was in her heart. She's rich, she's a countess, and yet what? Yet I'm sure she's not happy. What makes you think so? Well, when my own misfortune began to be too unbearable, I thought perhaps my old friends might help me in some way. I went to see Danglars, but he wouldn't even receive me. Fernand had one of his servants give me 100 francs. So you didn't see either of them? No, but Madame de Morcerf saw me. As I was leaving, a purse fell at my feet. It contained 25 louis. I looked up quickly and saw Mercedes closing the shutters. And what about Monsieur de Villefort? Asked the priest. Oh, he wasn't my friend. I didn't even know him, so I didn't ask him for anything. But don't you know what became of him and what part he played in Edmund's misfortune? No, I only know that at some time after he had Edmund arrested, he married Mademoiselle de Saint-Méran and left Marseille. No doubt fortune has smiled on him like the others. No doubt he's rich like Danglars and covered with honors like Fernand. I alone have remained poor, miserable, and forgotten by God. You're mistaken, my friend, said the priest. God may seem to forget sometimes when his justice is inactive, but he always remembers sooner or later, and here's the proof. So saying, he took the diamond from his pocket and handed it to Kadaru. Take this, my friend, he said. It's yours. What? For me alone? Cried Kadaru. You're not mocking me, are you? This diamond was to be divided among Edmund's friends, but he had only one friend. Take it and sell it. It's worth 50,000 francs, as I've told you, and I hope that will be enough to put an end to your poverty. Take it, but in exchange, Kadaru, who was already touching the diamond, drew back his hand. The priest smiled. In exchange, he continued, give me the red silk purse that Monsieur Morel left on old Dantes's mantelpiece. You told me you still had it, didn't you? Okay, so Monsieur Morel gave money to the dad right before he died, no? He gave money for the dad's funeral. It was in a red purse. It was like in a red money bag, a red coin purse, no? And the priest then said, give me that coin purse and I will give you the diamond. It will all be for you. Kadaru, more and more astonished, went over to a large oaken cupboard, opened it, and took out a faded red silk purse. The priest took it and gave Kadaru the diamond. Then, amid Kadaru's effusive declarations of gratitude, he walked out, mounted his horse, bade Kadaru farewell, and rode off in the same direction from which he had come. When Kadaru turned around, he saw his wife standing behind him, paler than ever. Well, she said, is what I heard true? What, that he gave us the whole diamond? Said Kadaru, almost mad with joy. Yes. There's nothing truer. Here it is. His wife looked at it for a moment, then said in a dull voice, what if it were only an imitation diamond? Kadaru reeled. Imitation, he murmured. Why should he have given me an imitation diamond? To learn your secret without paying you for it, idiot. Kadaru was dazed by the weight of this supposition. Oh, he said after a silence, taking his hat and placing it over the red handkerchief he wore around his head. We'll find out about that. How? There's a fair at Beaucaire and there are jewelers from Paris there. I'm going to show the diamond to them. Take care of the inn. I'll be back in 2 hours. He rushed out the door and began to run down the road. 50,000 francs, said Madame Caderousse to herself. It's a lot of money, but it's not a fortune. The whole point of chapter 15, of chapter 16 rather, it's a long chapter, but it really catches us up to date on what happened to Danglars, on what happened to Mercedes, to Fernand, to Monsieur Morel. It really gives us, the readers, and Dantes, who, I don't know if you figured it out, but Dantes was the priest, no? He was disguising as the priest. It catches us up on all of these other characters. Okay, what happened in the time Dantes was in prison, and when he got out, and when he was finding the treasure in Monte Cristo. It's really giving us kind of a full history of what happened to all these other important characters. So that's chapter 16.